Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. Let's get it done. It's David Summers hosting another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Here comes the story of wrestling in America, as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. Now we step back into the ring, back into time. Let's get hooked up with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, hanging out in the Great Smoky Mountains. What's going on, Ron?
Jace, man, just enjoying it. Beautiful blue sky today. Little cool, but wow, I guess it's a little cool around the country, man. It's been a little strange early in the year, but it's made a world of difference between this year and last year. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? No,
yeah.
This time last year we were all burning up.
Yeah. Hey, we're actually a little bit of a warming trend in southeast Alabama, but let me say happy Thanksgiving. And are you headed over the river through the woods to Grandma's house? What's going on?
Yeah, man. I'm going up into Kentucky to visit my grandson. I'm going to be able to watch my grandson play basketball.
Wow.
Couple of times, and kind of just get out of Dodge for a little bit, man. Be good.
That's awesome. And
we're good.
Remind us again your grandson's name.
His name is Charles, and Charles is 16 years old and 6'9" and 230 pounds.
Oh, he's not Charles. He's Sir Charles. Wow. So he's how old now?
He's 16. He's 16, just turned 16.
And he's 6'9"?
Yeah, he's 6'9", man. Yeah, and 230 pounds. Heck, at that age, I was about 6'8", but I was 160 pounds.
Right.
Boy's a big boy.
Yeah, so when you see this kid, he's staring you eye to eye.
Yeah. Me and Chad, my oldest son, he's a 6'9" too.
Yeah,
6'10", right at 6'10", a little taller than me.
That's awesome. Okay, so you're going to catch a basketball game, but you guys going to have kind of the traditional Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah, we're gonna have a good time Thanksgiving, and I guess I'll come back home toward the weekend. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there too, man. So it's a great time of year. What a great tradition for us in this country, and just hope everybody has a safe one and a happy one.
It is truly an American holiday. We invented Thanksgiving, and I think that's to me one of the most important holidays in a year. Is a time for everybody to get together and break bread. That's awesome. All right. Yeah. And safe travels for you guys, and our best to the whole family there in Kentucky, right?
Yeah. Kentucky,
okay. All right. Good deal. All right. Listen, Ron, you've been alluding to the Knoxville wrestling war. Let's just jump into this thing. In some small way, it seems like on every Studcast lately. Obviously, that event changed your life, and it began to develop long before 1979. You've already touched on some of the unknown things that are still to come in the future. Just a few minutes ago, by the way, before we started this Studcast, you mentioned one of those, someone who's going to appear that in this Studcast made you think of that very difficult time in your life again. So do you mind telling everybody about that one?
Oh man, absolutely not, Dave. And of course I don't mind talking about it. It's going to be the subject matter for quite a while here in the future too. So I'm looking forward to it. I was probably going to mention it anyway, as a matter of fact, and I don't really mind talking about it. I've kind of grown way past having any bad thoughts about it or any bad feelings toward people. So but it's kind of like the old expression, it's kind of like the elephant in the room, and so let's get the elephant out of the room here pretty quick here today.
Right, okay. Right.
So when I was doing my research this week, and I do them for all the Studcasts, one name obviously kept kind of popping out to me. In fact, I mentioned he was coming back last week in the Studcast last week, coming back to Knoxville, and he's on the Knoxville card for this Studcast, and it was his first match in almost a year. Since I looked it back up on December 16th, 1977, almost exactly a year ago, was his last match, and he wrestled Ronnie Garvin in a steel cage submission match on that event. And he was one of the best wrestlers in the world at that time, undoubtedly. And that could have, and he could have gone and worked in anybody's territory. And he'd been Southeastern Tag Champions with Ronnie Garvin throughout most of 1977, if you think back on it. And then he turned on Garvin, and they feuded against each other until that big match on December 16th, 1977. And on that night, he lost to Garvin in a steel cage submission match, and that was his last. He kind of disappeared, man, from Knoxville.
He must have had a link to the upcoming Knoxville War, didn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. He was right. One of those people, and the war actually began not until May of 1979, but it was started by basically five members of a 15-man crew that I had at that time. I call them the Knoxville Five. I kind of got a name for them, and a lot of people associate them with that term, and they became nicknamed that, and they decided to start their own wrestling company in Knoxville. So 4 of those 5 wrestlers were already wrestling in Southeastern wrestling at this time that we're talking about, and fans will be familiar with this. Everybody listens to the Studcast. And so 44 years ago, Bob Roop was already here in Southeastern Knoxville. Larry Simon, who was the Boris Malenko, his real name was Larry Simon. Ron Wright, Ronnie Garvin, those were 4 of the 5. And when I was again looking at this week's Knoxville card for Friday, November 17th, 78, I realized that the final piece of that puzzle, man, Bob Orton.Jr. was starting back after almost a year's absence. So I don't think any of them at that point in late 1978 had any ideas about establishing their own wrestling company. I don't think at this point they were thinking about trying to do their own thing. But with Bob Orton.Jr.'s arrival, the entire group was all there, and all of them were going to become part of history in that war.
It's going to, no doubt, be a fascinating subject as we work our way towards it. So I appreciate the fact that you're giving us a little piece of the puzzle every Studcast, it seems like. So I can't wait to ride with you into something very few fans know anything about, this wrestling war. Everything was behind the scenes. It was just nobody knew about it then. Very few know about it now. All right, so speaking of riding, where are we going to ride today, Stud?
Well, we're going to change things up a little bit in this Studcast, Dave. We're going to ride into Southeastern Gulf Coast first this time, and we're going to focus on the card there. And we'll also be talking about that card being in the 3 major markets. We'll be talking about the same week that we're going to be doing in Knoxville, November 17th, the week of November 17th, 1978, basically the week before Thanksgiving. We'll discuss the special rating period of TV. which this one is going to be like the second week in television, which that show is going to be on November 11th, 1978, not just in Knoxville, but down south in Dothan and across Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, all along the Gulf Coast. So I'm going to give everybody the results of that card and the attendances in Montgomery, Mobile, and Dothan, like I've been doing the last couple of Studcasts. And then we're going to ride back north into Knoxville, and we'll talk about the Coliseum card there on Friday night, November the 17th, 1978. And we'll find out what was on that very important rating period TV that promoted the card. We'll talk about the results of that card there and the attendance there in Knoxville as well. And then I'm going to talk briefly about stars coming in both territories and those wrestlers that's being swapped from one territory to another during this time frame, and why that was important. If we can get to that, hopefully we can, my man.
Right.
And then another learning tree, if we can get that far.
Yeah, okay, so it sounds like you have loaded this thing up, and this is going to be a big-time ride into wrestling history. So I can't believe we're starting with my local area. So who was on the Southeastern Gulf Coast card for the 3 Alabama cities?
Well, there were 2 great baby faces, man, making their debut on those nights. They were in 3 towns. Monday was Montgomery, Wednesday was Mobile, and Friday was Dothan. So we got 2 great baby faces coming in, and the opening match featured one of them. He was a young kid named Frankie Lane. He had a pretty good future ahead of him, and he's going to be in the first match against Sir Winston. Ricky Fields was going to be wrestling against Norvell Austin. Great worker, man, and a big name, and going to be huge in that territory. The Gulf Coast was going to get its first look at one of the great wrestlers that's going to be huge in the future of that territory, and that's Jimmy Golden. And Jimmy's making his first Southeastern Gulf Coast debut in this Studcast against Gorgeous George Jr. And then there's a very special loser leave match between 2 of the stars that had been there since the day Southeastern's open business along the Gulf Coast. And I'm talking about Charlie Cook, and he's going to be taking on Dr. D, David Schultz, in a loser leave match. So a lot going on for those 2 guys. And then the new tag champions, Don Carson and the Assassin, managed by Billy Spears, were defending their belts against my brother Rob and Tony Charles. But we won't know much about that until the upcoming TV show. That doesn't get squared away until this TV show comes on, actually. And then the main event was for the Southeastern title, the Mongolian Stomper managed by Gorgeous George Jr. Versus the territory's undoubtedly hottest babyface, Bob Armstrong.
That is a really great 6-match card. So 2 title matches, a loser leaves match, and 2 new baby faces in the first 3 matches. So how about the TV show that promoted this card? It had to be a big one to get it all set up.
Well, it opened with the Southeastern Tag Team Champions, Don Carson, the Assassin, and Billy Spears. And they're already at the set when the show opens up. They're with Charlie. And Charlie, is seated there, and so is Billy Spears. And he's got Carson and the Assassin behind him. And they got their belts over their shoulders. And Spears gets right to the point, man, at the beginning of this program. And since, he had asked Charlie Platt if he could say something earlier before the show opened. So Charlie brought him out there, had him sitting there. And so right away, it was Spears' opportunity to talk, and he didn't have a problem as usual. He was the Ron Wright of Gulf Coast. And, he had the best tag team in the world, too, as a matter of fact. That's what he thought anyway, and he wanted to prove it. He said he wanted to prove he had the best tag team in the world today on TV, and that his team was going to defend their belts today, right here on the television show. And Southeastern officials could pick anybody they wanted to go for the belts.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's pretty mouthy there right off the bat.
Yeah.
So then Charlie was pretty sharp, and he goes, well, hell, I think, he says, that's a great idea, he says, but I wished you to let the company know about this idea before the show went on the air.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to pick somebody at the last minute. So, he said at least that'd be able to see that the Southeastern officials, you'd give them time to at least find a good team. But with this short notice, either way, he says, I think this is going to be great. Glad you're putting your champions' belts on the line on television, and it wasn't scheduled. And we're going to schedule this match for last in today's show. Give us opportunity to figure out who the heck to put in there with you. So as soon as they cleared the set, Bob Armstrong, Tony Charles got the studio audience ready for what's going to be a great TV show. And they came to the set and they watched the Wild Classic tag match, championship match from Mobile, Alabama 3 days earlier. And this video started off with Tony Charles making a hot tag to Bob Armstrong, who made one of those tremendous comebacks that he was famous for, man. And he was beating the hell out of Carson, the Assassin, and Billy Spears. Billy got involved, and he had all three of them down in the ring. And then he covered the Assassin, and the referee was starting to count the Assassin out, which that would have been for the championship. They would have been the champions at that point. But, Gorgeous George Jr., who had never gotten involved in Billy Spears' tag team matches, he came to the ring. And he came in the ring, and instead of going to Bob Armstrong, he dropped an elbow in the referee's back, who was trying to count the Assassin out. And then he got up and he stomped Bob in the back of the head. Bob never saw him even come in the ring. Then Tony Charles took it from there, man. And he started taking care of both those managers. Gorgeous George Jr. was in the ring. Billy Spears was in the ring. Carson, the Assassin, was down. Bob was down.
Wow.
And I wasn't there, but Rob told me the crowd was so loud on the video in the television station that they were watching that it just really, really said they got the studio audience involved. Because they were watching on a monitor, and then the crowd was huge, and it was really loud. And he said the studio audience started watching it just like it was live. They were reacting to it like the video was just happening. And then Don Carson in this video loaded his glove, and he stopped Tony Charles. And the Assassin got Armstrong up into a full Nelson, and Carson was going to nail him with his loaded glove. And when he went to throw the punch, Armstrong ducked, and Carson knocked the Assassin cold. And then Armstrong headbutted Don Carson, and he went through the ropes out into the floor. And Bob covered the Assassin for the second time in the match. And the referee, was trying to count him out again. Right? I mean, he dropped an elbow the first time. Now he crawls over there, and he's trying to count him out again. And when he does, Mongolian Stomper enters the down ring this time. And he's there basically to save his manager for one, but then he stomped Armstrong. And this time the referee started ringing the bell. He says, well, this is twice now. And disqualified the champions. And then Stomper got GG. And they headed for the arena floor, and Carson and Spears drugged the Assassin, who was still half-assed, unconscious at this point, and they drug him out to the floor, and all five of those guys had to be surrounded by the police, man. It's Mobile. I guess that's a good way to describe it. I've been through it myself and been arrested from a scene like this. They got surrounded by the police, and they got them to the dressing room, and there was just a little bit of the end of it. Rob, told me that they threw bottles, but he said the bottles came flying. You could see all the debris coming from the fans. It was crazy deal, normal Mobile deal, man. And so Bob and Tony, they watched this whole thing, and at this point, they're pretty angry about it, and they're like, wow, this is ridiculous. We had the championship won twice. And then Bob told Charlie that the video, he said it's pretty obvious in this video, the Mongolian Stomper and Gorgeous George Jr., they went out of their way to pinpoint me. He said, Junior hit Stomp me, and then Stomper stomped me, and then, and he said that he'd be more than happy to let him have him if that's what they were looking for, man. He said, I'd like to go eye to eye with the Stomper. So then the studio crowd, they popped on that, obviously, man. I'm sure they were ready to see somebody take care of the Stomper. So then he continued. He went on by saying he wanted a shot at the Stomper Southeastern belt. He'd been wanting it for a long time, and he had worn that belt long before the Stomper arrived, which is true. He and I switched it back and forth several times. But, he hadn't had that belt on in a while, and he said he'd like to get that belt back. And the crowd loved that too. So then Tony jumped in, and he said, they just heard the challenge that Big Mouth Billy Spears was out there with you, Charlie, and he opened the show, and he said his team would wrestle anybody that Southeastern officials picked for a tag match right here on television today. And he said that he and Bob would be glad, more than happy, to volunteer to be those opponents right here on TV. And the crowd's really into it. They're popped again, right?
Listen, there hadn't even been a match yet, and already 3 huge roars from the studio crowd. So what's next?
Well, Billy Spears came back to the set, and he was screaming that his champions would absolutely not defend their belts against Bob Armstrong and Tony Charles on TV. He's like, hey, we just defended our belts against these guys. And, and he said that, they just had their match on the video that you just watched there. And that Bob Armstrong had just admitted he wanted a shot at the Mongolian Stomper. So, and that he said, he couldn't just say, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with either one of them. And he says, Tony Charles can pick anybody he wants other than Bob Armstrong to be his partner, and we'll take those 2 guys on. So that's when my brother came out. He joined Bob and Tony at the set, and there's another round of applause. And then Don Carson and the Assassin, they came out and got behind Billy, to protect him. And Rob was at this point, man, he said the studio was really up. They were really ready to see something happen. And he said Rob asked Tony if he'd be willing to let him be his partner for a shot at the tag championship in the last match of the show. And that he had a big score to settle with these idiots too, he called them, pointing at Spears and his team. And that they were responsible for, obviously, me not being there anymore. And now his father had been hurt. So Tony said he'd love to have Rob as a partner, and that was another big pop. And now they got a main event that's going to be a pretty cool deal. Tempered man at this point. We're flaring on both sides of the desk, and Charlie's obviously sitting in the middle of all this and kind of gets concerned about the situation, and he kind of quickly took control. He said he was sure under the circumstances Southeastern officials would agree to this match, and that Bob Armstrong obviously deserved a Southeastern title match with the Mongolian Stomper. And he said he'd like to see that happen this coming week. And after what happened in Mobile, he deserved that shot. And then Tony Charles was going to be allowed to have Rob as a partner for a Southeastern Tag Championship on TV today. So the studio just kept exploding. This is all building towards something good, man, on this show. And then Charles asked the ring announcer, Charlie, to try to settle things down. He threw it up to the ring, said, hey, let's get the first match going.
Listen, that studio had to be on fire. I mean, after all that, and it was only going to be the first match. And who was in that first match?
Well, the Mongolian Stomper was in the very first match, man. So, this thing is really cranked up. And him and Gorgeous George Jr. come out.
Are you kidding? All right, so did he charge the studio crowd like usual?
Even worse than usual. I guess they're sitting back there watching the monitor, and they go, "Wow, man, we need to do something here." So,
Wow.
and then he just went nuts with the studio audience, had them all going crazy, and then he destroyed his opponent while Gigi was. Went to Charlie Platt back to the set, his first chance to complain, and he was he was saying, Charlie, what gives you the authority to make a decision like Bob Armstrong can have a title match with my champion? Because you're not the promoter here. You're not the guy you don't have the right to do that. And obviously by this point, the show's really rocking, man. And as a fan favorite, Charlie Cook, after the first interview, he came to the set and he watched the video from the night before in Dothan, and it showed both him and David Schultz being disqualified. They had that second, they had started out with a 4-corner match. The two of them ended up the last two in the ring. They got into it. They were disqualified. There was going to be a $1,000 bonus. Then it changed to $2,000. And he asked that this time they have another one because they had a second one that they got disqualified. And he said, let's just make this thing a loser leave town. He said, I'm willing to, if I can't beat David Schultz, and as long as we have been fighting back and forth, he goes, one of us needs to go. So, so the man had just challenged David Schultz, and he was on his way to the ring. That was the person in the match, in the second match. And he had his big TV trophy that he had won from Tony Charles on the last TV. And he was screaming at Charlie Cook, who was still at the desk as he was on his way to the ring, that you got it. You want to lose or leave? You got it, man. He goes, I love it. So Rob said the TV enhancement talent, those people that we brought in to wrestle these stars on TV, he said, my gosh, Ron, they were having a bad day. He said Stomper annihilated his, and he goes, Schultz was even worse on the second one. He goes, wow. He said, I was afraid we weren't going to get guys to come to TV anymore. So the personality profile was next. That was with Gorgeous George Jr. and his Stomper. And Stomper had his championship belt on at this point, and he was pumping. Now, he'd already wrestled, but he's pumping his big old tire truck shock, man, while this is all going on. And there was about a 5-minute profile. He never stopped, pumping that thing. And so then Gigi watched a film from Montgomery, a video from Montgomery where my dad had been stomped in the face by the Mongol in a match and had to be carried out of the ring. And Rob said the Stomper, man, in the background, and when they came out of that video, he said he was sweating like a maniac, man, down Charlie's back. He said it was dripping on Charlie. And, he said, wow, he looked absolutely ferocious, man. He goes, I've never seen him look so good. Then Bob Armstrong was in the third match. And like always, he tore the house down, man. He tore that studio up, and he won with a sleeper hold. Now he's got him a championship match coming up the following week. And then the last match, obviously, was the Southeastern Tag Championship match. Billy Spears, champions. Don Carson and the Assassin were going to wrestle against Tony Charles and my brother Robert. And this one ended just about as wild as the match in Mobile 3 nights earlier. Rob said, he told me that he was bleeding during the course of the match, and then he and Tony had a chance to win it. They were about to win the match, and Billy Spears tried to stop Rob. I think Rob said he was going back and forth from the ropes, and Billy Spears reached in there, tried to trip him, and he stomped Spears' hand, and Spears, I can't imagine this part of it, but he said, but Spears got so mad he charged in the ring like he was going to do something to Rob. And as soon as Spears got in the ring, well, the referee rang the bell for the disqualification of his champions. And Rob said, Spears came flying through the ropes, and he's standing up. He said, I just put the Fuller leg lock on him. So he's got Spears in a Fuller leg lock, and he says, Gorgeous George Jr. again comes to the ring like he had done in Mobile, and he, to save Billy. I guess the two managers were getting pretty close, and Rob said he got stomped. He stomped him again like he had before. And then while both Carson and the Assassin had Tony down at that point, he said that it was going pretty crazy in the studio by that time. And he said the next one to enter the ring, there were 4 heels in there, was Bob Armstrong. And Rob said he just cleared that ring, man. He started stomping and chopping everybody in sight, and the studio is going nuts. And Stomper then came to the ring himself. He got Bob. He stopped Bob, and then he threw him in the ropes, and he went for a big punch, and Bob ducked it, and they put the sleeper hold on the Stomper. Now the bell was ringing, the referee's down. It's just crazy, Rob said, until all the heels then took a powder and hit the floor. So last interview was Bob and Rob and Tony. All those 3 guys were at the set talking about championship matches. And then both the managers, Spears and GG, the Stomper and Carson, and the Assassin, all of those guys were live in another studio.
Wow. Okay, so I can only imagine how that 2 minutes went after all that had just happened in the last match.
Well, Charlie Platt kind of ended it all by telling everyone, after the interview was over, that they didn't want to miss next week's TV show, that fans were going to get next week on television the Battle Royal.
Wow.
And they basically had a battle royal almost in the last match on this TV. But Charlie said, next week we've already scheduled it. This hardly ever happens, but we're going to have it next week, a battle royal on television.
Oh, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. All right, so everything is setting up for the next week in the arenas in the 3 major markets. What happened there?
Well, newcomer, Frankie Lane, he got a win over Sir Winston. And then Norvell Austin, he got the best of Ricky Fields, who was a pretty good little wrestler, Ricky Fields. But Norvell Austin, man, he's pretty much in his prime at this point. Jimmy Golden, wow, Rob told me Jimmy Golden tore the house down, man. He said on the end of his match against Gorgeous George Jr., he climbed up on that top rope, and he hit Gorgeous George Jr. with a drop kick with both feet in the face. And he said Gorgeous George never touched the ropes. He went straight, landed on his back on the concrete, slid across the floor, and he couldn't get back in the ring before the 10 count. He was still laying there. Referee counted him out, and the Stomper had to come down and get him. And Rob said Stomper threw him over his shoulder and carried him back to the dressing room. So Gigi didn't have a very good night. But Rob said Jimmy got over big time. David Schultz sent Charlie Cook packing, man. Rob said it was a great match, and Charlie Cook was headed back to southeastern Knoxville for the first time. I shouldn't say back. It was going to be his first time in Knoxville. And he's going to have a pretty good run there. Both main events, the Stomper and Bob Armstrong for the Southeastern belt, and the Don Carson and the Assassin versus Rob and Tony Charles for the tag belts. Both those matches ended in about disqualification of the heels in both instances.
Wow. All right. So 3 major cities ahead. How did you do on attendance on those?
Well, we did about 3,700 in Montgomery. We did over 5,000 in Mobile, 5,100 in Mobile, and over 4,600 in Dothan.
Wow.
So we had about 13,400 fans in those 3 towns the week before Thanksgiving. Right, that's a pretty good wow for a territory that was been totally dead this time the year before.
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing figure.
Oh, no doubt. And really all three of those cities. That's a great card and TV, too, in Southeastern Gulf Coast, no doubt. Hey, this is a good place for a break. Let's do that when we come back. Southeastern Knoxville will be the focus on this Studcast. Stay with us. Hey, what's up, Studcast fans? Have you checked out Ron's website lately? TNstud.com will send you to a world of old school wrestling. You'll find videos of his matches, every Studcast ever done, every super Studcast ever done, all in the 3-hour range, only $2.99 each. His stud store, where you can find all kinds of wrestling products, plus his best-selling novel, Brutus, hundreds of classic photos on both his gallery and his Studcast page. It's all a walk through wrestling history, and most of it is free. When today's Studcast is finished, take a ride on tnstud.com and enjoy old school wrestling as it was meant to be. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back in. Episode number 276. Alabama loser leaves Tennessee 6-man elimination. All right, so let's keep moving. Okay, Stud, I think you said we were going to be talking about the November 17th, 1978 Knoxville Coliseum card on this Studcast. So who was on it?
Well, there's only going to be one newcomer on this card, but there will be. But he's going to be a big-name talent, and he's going to be returning, obviously, for his second run in Knoxville. And get to that in just a minute. The opening match was the Mighty Yankee, who is a pretty good talent, man. Had been around the South in probably every territory, worked on top in most of them. He was in his second week, and he got a win over Ted Allen, who is a pretty darn good worker himself, and a guy that's going to train one of the greatest of all time, Arn Anderson, down the road. Terry Gibbs was facing off against, here's the guy, Bob Orton.Jr., the wrestler that I mentioned a whole lot in this cast so far. So Gibbs he's got a tough night ahead of him. Dennis Hall was back for just his second Southeastern match, and he hadn't been in Knoxville since late September, but he was there this time to try and collect his good friend Kevin Sullivan's $10,000 bounty money. And all he had to do was put Ron Wright in the hospital. So he's back to see if he can do something to help his buddy Kevin Sullivan. Next match was a very unusual tape fist tag match. We didn't have many of those. And the Southeastern Tag Champions, Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson, who were presented by Ron Wright, they're facing a totally new team in this event. Jimmy Golden was gone. Obviously, he had lost, and him and Rip Smith lost the week before, and they had to split up for at least a year as a team. And Jimmy went south, man. So Rip Smith had a new partner for this Southeastern Gulf Coast, and Mike Stallings was this partner, and obviously Mike had spent most of this past 78 down in Southeastern Gulf Coast. And if Smith and Stallings won the match, the deal was for this. It was not a championship match, but they were going to receive a title match the next week if they could beat the tag team in a tape fist tag match. Mm-hmm. Then the main event was the 6-man elimination match. It had Ronnie Garvin, Ken Lucas, and the returning Kevin Sullivan. This time he's going to be in the ring rather than handcuffed to Ron Wright. And they were going to be against the great Malenko, Bob Roop, and the controversial Mass Destroyer.
See, that's another great, really good 5-match card. So the thing is, I can't wait to hear about the 6-man elimination tag with Bob Roop and the Masked Destroyer, both in the ring at the same time. So who was on the TV show 6 days before this card setting all this up?
Well, I had been back in Knoxville for about 3 weeks at this point, and I was able to sit at home and watch every one of the TVs, and then I sneaked in and out of the Coliseum a couple of times. When we were in the Coliseum, I couldn't sneak into the park building without being seen, but I didn't want fans to know that I was back, and I was trying not to be seen. So this is going to be a very interesting TV show, kind of like the last one, as a matter of fact. So Les opened it up, in a tight shot by announcing that there's going to be a rare 6-man elimination tag on this television show. And it's going to be Ronnie Garvin, it's going to be Kevin Sullivan, and Ken Lucas. And that got the show off to a pretty good start. Fans really liked that opportunity. These were really good matches, these elimination matches. They went on for a pretty decent period of time usually, and a whole lot of things could happen in that type of match. So when the cameras backed away from the tight shot of Les announcing that there's an elimination match on today's show, there sat Ron Wright, and he had his champions behind him, and they were proudly wearing their championship belts. And Wright couldn't wait to get the video going from the night before, because it was going to show his team winning, getting himself a victory. He was going to cover the fact that they had kept their belts and that they didn't have to split up. That's what he was worried about, that the loser of this match had to split up as a team. And he loved the fact that Jimmy Golden was beaten, and Rip Smith was separated from Golden for at least a year. They couldn't wrestle his team anymore, and that wasn't going to bother his team. And then he wanted to brag about how great his team was. Kind of like, I guess, in a way, what Billy Spears had done opening part of the show down south. Wright's really, he's saying that his team is about the greatest that there's ever been, and he was talking about how wonderful it was to have eliminated the team last week for an entire year. And in the same sentence, he started complaining about the next team that's coming up, and he said that he wasn't going to allow his team, his champions, to wrestle a new team. Rip Smith is going to be partnering with Mike Stallings. He goes, why would we give them a championship match? They don't even know each other. They had never wrestled together. They ain't going to get a championship match, And he said, they got to prove themselves. So, Les said, that, this new team happens to be wrestling today, right here in the first match of the show, and I guess we're going to find out how good they are. And Wright cut him off, man. And he said, Les, and as Ron would say, Les Thatcher, he goes, they just wrestling a couple of jabronis up there. That ain't like my champions. That ain't enough to prove anything. So, and then he said his team would, he says, my team's only going to defend the belts. We'll do it in the tape fist match. If these boys will tape up their fists and let my boys tape up their fists next Friday night, if they beat my boys in the tape fist match, he goes, he says, we'll give them that match, and he said, he said, the one thing about that, Les, is Smith and Stallings, he said, they just going to get a good old Tennessee dog whooping. And he goes, they probably after that dog whooping ain't going to even want a chance at the belt.
Of course not.
They would have changed their minds, right? They're going to get beat up so bad, they're not going to want to wrestle them anymore.
No.
So, well, in the studio crowd, they let him know what they thought about that. That's like, they booed him like crazy. Well, and then his team boy behind him, they was patting him on the back. Ron, you keep going. Oh, you know how Ron was, man. He didn't need much encouragement to run that mouth. And so he told Les, he says, that's all I got to say about it. And he got up and he started to leave, and then he stopped and he turned back to Les and he said, it's been your pleasure to have us on the opening of the show because nobody can follow us. And then they went on to the dressing room. So as they walked away, Les he was so crazy about the show, man. It was his deal, man. And he was upset by the little remark about nobody could follow him in there. And Les says, while he's walking off, he says, well, that fact remains to be seen. And then he threw it up to the ring for a ring introduction of Smith and Stallings. So they had their fist tape, man, 6 days before the tape fist match, but they're ready already, man, and they look ready for the next Friday night. And they were ready to do their deal, man, and they looked like they'd been a team for years. I was watching the show going, wow, these guys look like they've wrestled together for a long darn time. And it didn't take long for them to beat their opponents, man. And And they did it by throwing the two guys together, and then both the two guys finally got up, and well, they already had the big tape fist, so they both hit them with right hands, and wow, they covered both of them in the middle of the ring. It was a pretty good win for a team that had never wrestled together. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So then the new team, they got fired up. The studio they popped. The studio was really into them, and they got fired up, and they earned the title shot, and they went to the set, boy, and really ready to talk, and they actually held their own against Ron Wright in the interview, man, and his champions were with him in Studio B, and then when they cut to Studio B, I mean, Wright probably sat there and they watched this match, and the boys had their fist tape. Well, when they got to Studio B, Ron Wright's team had their fist tape. I mean, they looked like they were going to go at it right there on TV. So the match was going to be very interesting, man, the following week for new team against some pretty good champions, man, of Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson. So Dennis Hall, he's a close friend of Kevin Sullivan. He was next on the card. He was in the second match, and he was in that 10,000 bounty match with Ron Wright Incorporated. I need to throw that in there. I'm sure Ron Wright would have liked me to throw that in there. He wasn't just Ron Wright anymore. He's a company, a corporation. And Hall was a veteran competitor, man. He was a darn good wrestler, Dennis Hall, and he showed it in this match. And Kevin Sullivan joined him for the second interview, explaining to the fans that Ron Wright refused to wrestle him since his injury. Kevin said, the only reason that Dennis is here is Ron Wright won't wrestle me. And if he did, I'm going to put him in the hospital, and I wouldn't have to pay somebody for it. But he says, I'm going to keep my fans coming until somebody, one of them puts Ron Wright in the hospital. He was very serious about the hospital deal. And, he says, if Ron Wright ain't going to give me a chance to do it myself, I'm just going to have one of my friends do it for me. So then came the personality profile, had Ronnie Garvin, Kevin Sullivan, and also the big star, man, great wrestler, Ken Lucas, that had just come into the territory. The next Friday night, they were in a 6-man elimination tag against the great Malenko, Bob Roop, and the Masked Destroyer. And so they watched the video from the night before. They had wrestled them the night before. It had been Garvin and Lucas against Malenko and Destroyer, and Sullivan had been handcuffed to Ron Wright. And it was a pretty wild match, and it got even more wild after the match was over. And Garvin and Lucas had won the match, but when they took the handcuffs off of Sullivan and Wright, they got into it, and then all 4 of the other guys got back into it. That thing ended up a really pretty crazy deal right there at the end of it all. And so most of the discussion during this profile, though, was about the subject that you brought up a little bit earlier, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
That was Bob Roop and the so-called Masked Destroyer,
right,
who most fans thought was also Bob Roop. How's Bob Roop going to be both of these guys in the same match, right?
Right.
Is he going to do that, right? So it was certainly going to be a very intriguing match, that's for sure.
Uh-huh. Is that all you're going to tell us about this, Ron? I mean, what is happening with Bob Roop?
Well, we're going to talk about the match, Dave. We'll get to that. But let's finish the TV first. Okay. So let's put it in the proper order.
Okay, Stud. So who is in the next match on the TV show?
And so you just ask. You had just ask about him. As a matter of fact, the guy was in the next match was Bob Roop. So the great Malenko and the Masked Destroyer, when Bob Roop comes to the ring, they come with him. The Masked Destroyer has the mask on, and he's got the Bob Roop outfit on, and he looks exactly like Bob Roop. It's like, wait a minute, what in the heck? And so during the TV match, which Roop won real quick, right, and he won it with a shoulder breaker, and another kid got carried out. I'm sure fans were really wondering, well, wow, what is going on here, right?
Man, this is getting crazy. All right, so let's get the TV over with and get into what happened the following Friday night.
Well, everybody enjoyed a quick 6-man elimination tag at the end of this TV match. Garvin, Sullivan, Lucas, man, they just destroyed the other team. In fact, they won. When these elimination matches and you beat one guy, you get to pick your next opponent, and none of these three big superstars lost. So 3 straight guys were out. Bang, bang, bang. It didn't last too long, this elimination match. The 3 stars didn't lose at all, and the team they were facing all got beat pretty darn quickly. That brought us to the last interview of the show, and it was done by Garvin and Sullivan and Lucas at the set, and Malenko and Narup, and the Mass Destroyer were in Studio B. Every one of those 6 guys got involved and talked in the interview except for the Destroyer, who, as usual, never said a word. Since he had arrived, he had never said a word. So Les closed out the TV. Had a little tease for the next show. He said the great Malenko was going to be defending his TV trophy against a returning star next week that happened to be a very tall wrestler. And he happened to be the brother of the man Malenko had won the TV trophy from. And so needless to say, the fans figured out pretty quick who he was probably talking about. And as the show went off the air, it was a big round of applause for next week.
All right, I can't take it anymore, Ron. So can you hurry through the results of these matches and get to the last one? Step it up.
Okay, all right. So, the Mighty Yankee beat Ted Allen in the first match. Bob Orton.Jr. won his first match back in Knoxville over Terry Gibbs. And wow, I was able to get in the Coliseum without people knowing I was there. And I watched him, man, and he did something that I had never seen before. He did an inverted pile driver. Instead of just putting the guy head between your legs and the guy's back of his head is facing your body, he turned him around face first and put his head in, and he pile drive him in an inverted pile driver. Wow, it was unbelievable, man. And they carried the guy out. They carried him out. Terry Gibbs was a good star. He was going to be a great young wrestler. He's going to be going to Southeastern Gulf Coast, but they carried him out that night, and he never came back. That was Terry Gibbs' last match ever in Knoxville and in Southeastern Knoxville.
For real? Wow.
And then in the $10,000 bounty match, Dennis Hall worked on Ron Wright's leg the entire match, which made sense. If you're going to send somebody to the hospital, you better focus on something that get it done. And Wright was in a whole lot of pain during the course of the match, and Ron Wright fought like crazy, and he tried to leave the ring a couple of times, and Hall went and got him, brought him back, threw him in the ring, and then finally Hall put the figure 4 on him, man. Now, he's already worked on the leg, and, I figured this is it, man. This is going to do it. And then the Destroyer came down to the ring, and he dropped an elbow on Hall because he's got the figure 4, and you're pretty helpless when you're got your legs all intertwined with somebody and you're laying on your back. You can't get your legs unhooked. And so then the Destroyer just dropped an elbow on him, and then he got Ron Wright disqualified. Referee rang the bell, and obviously Wright lost the match. But obviously, too, the Destroyer saved Wright from further injury, and maybe taking a trip to the hospital. And then this one wasn't over yet. Kevin, I always watch these matches, and why not? I mean, it was his personal friends that were in the ring, and it was his money at stake, too, right?
Exactly.
$1,000. He's going to watch these matches, and so he saw the Destroyer what the Destroyer did, and then he went to the ring, man. And the Destroyer threw the referee out of the ring, and then while he was trying to help, the referee was there trying to help Dennis Hall get back up on his feet, and the Destroyer just grabbed the referee, threw him over the top rope, and then he grabbed Hall, Dennis, and he threw him over his shoulder. He was going to give him a shoulder breaker. But Kevin was right there. He had made it to the ring at that point, and he dived into the ring, and he didn't have enough time to grab a hold of Hall's body and maybe drag him off his shoulders. So Kevin did something I hadn't seen in years. He just dived into the back of the Destroyer's knees, and that collapsed the Destroyer, and he had Hall on his shoulders, and the Destroyer hurt his ankles. I mean, he couldn't get up. Kevin then went and got Hall and the referee, and they helped Hall back to the dressing room. And then Malenko and Bob Orton.Jr. came down to the ring, and they helped the Destroyer back to the dressing room. So the next match was the Tape Fist tag match, and that was Rip Smith and Mike Stallings against Condrey and Nickerson. And obviously they were presented by Ron Wright Incorporated. And the Tennessee dog whooping that Wright had promised on TV, it happened. But it was done by Smith and Stallings instead of his team.
Oh.
They opened up, man, and they beat the heck out of Wright's men. They busted both of them open with those tape fists, and they won right in the middle of the ring. So it was like, wow, it was pretty humiliating, I figure, for Wright. And they were going to be back next week, and they were going to get a shot now at the championship belts. So, and they had earned it. So then the main event was scheduled as Ronnie Garvin, Kevin Sullivan, and Ken Lucas in a 6-man elimination tag match against Malenko, Roop, and the Destroyer. But the Destroyer didn't come. He had already suffered an injury in the two match previously, and Bob Orton.Jr. took the Destroyer's place. And the fans were pretty upset by that fact. Mm-hmm. They didn't like Orton to begin with, and they sure didn't like Orton coming out there and taking place. They're like you, I think, Dave's like, what in the heck, man? We want to see how this is going to work out.
Right.
And I think the fact that Bob Roop was they really gave the whole thing away, because Bob Roop was there at the ring, but he never got out of the corner. He never got in the ring the entire match.
Wow.
And it looked like he was having a hard time standing up.
Wow.
So that might answer your question, Dave.
Okay. All right. So how did the match end up?
Well, that match was declared a no contest. Both teams got disqualified, man.
I can understand that. All right. That's a very really interesting night of wrestling for the Southeastern Knoxville fans. And how did you do? What was the box like?
Well, it was just over 5,000 fans again. And it was the first time in weeks that they had topped that 5,000 again.
Wow. Okay. All right. Hey, Ron, good news. I'm checking time on the show, and because fans enjoy these so much, it looks like we've got time for another learning tree question. Let's do that. This one is about your father again. It comes from a gentleman named Roger Barnes. He asked, since we learned more about your father from a lady's question last week, he seems like he was a good guy and evidently pretty tough. Do you have any quick stories about his toughness?
Well, that's a good question. Geez. Oh, man. Let me just gather some thoughts here. It seems like my father's getting over on the Studcast, Dave. Last week he was the star at the end of the show, and he's like, here he is again at the end of the show, a star. And Mr. Barnes, I think that's what the guy's name was that asked the question.
That's right.
I can think of one story instantly, and hopefully, as I tell this one, I might be able to come up with a couple more. But I remember when I was in college, my first year of college, as a matter of fact, and I came home, and we lived on a farm in Georgia. And I came home for a few days, and I had a couple of friends that lived in that area, and so I had a couple of buddies that came and visited me, and the three of us were out in the field with my father, Buddy. We'll call him Buddy. Okay.
Right.
So me and my two buddies are out there with Buddy, with my dad, and there's a tractor in the field, and he's got a bush hog behind him, right? And we're kind of walking around and talking, and the dad's telling a story, I think, and the track, and we kind of passed behind the tractor, and the bush hog about that time ran over a pile of rocks, man. And one of them, you've seen, how these bush hogs work, man. Those son of a guns, that blade is just twirling in there, and it threw a rock about the size of a baseball, man. Came out shooting out of the back of the bush hog, like a rocket, man. And so we're all four of us standing kind of fairly close together, man, walking and talking, and my dad was telling a story, and you imagine that, Dave, well, telling a story,
right?
So the rock from the bush hog hit Dad right in the chin, right?
Whoa!
And it sounded like a rock hitting a tree, man. And it flew. It hit him in the chin, and then it ricocheted off of his face like he was a tree.
Are you kidding?
Huh?
Are you kidding?
No. I mean, a big rock, almost the size of a baseball. Come out of the bush hog and hit him right in the chin, bang! And while he's talking, and it sounded like it hit a tree, like a thud, boom, and then it ricocheted off, and then it hit him hard enough that it forced his head down. Bang! It hit him in the chin and forced his head down, and it cut his chin bad, and it almost knocked him down.
Wow.
He kind of staggered a little bit, and then he quickly recovered his balance, and he never missed a sentence in the story.
Oh my God!
And he didn't sell that the rock even hit him, right?
Oh my God!
Like it never happened. I mean, he got hit by this giant rock at 100 miles an hour and cut his chin, and he's bleeding, and he just went on with the story.
God. Holy cow. Okay.
So then, and so those guys, later on, they told me, later in the day, they end up staying there most of the day. Later on, they told me that rock would have knocked them unconscious and they'd still be laying there 4 hours later.
No doubt. Wow.
So, and that would kind of brings to mind another one. This happened the same day. So after this happened, we were still out there in the field. We didn't go home. Dad never went home. He got his handkerchief out, and he kind of got his chin to quit bleeding, and we just went ahead and kind of just walked around and then did whatever, hung out, and did several days, walked all over the farm, basically, and so that same afternoon, still had the same guys there. And these boys knew I was a pretty good wrestler because we always had a ring in the barn, man, back in those days. And they had been there a lot of times, and I wrestled against them, and wow, they couldn't do nothing, but they knew that I was pretty decent at this point. And so Dad had kind of separated himself from us. He walked on in front of us a little bit, and we were headed back toward the house. And there was a gate that you had to go through. And he was in front of us, and he was kind of standing up by the gate, waiting on us, going to let us come on in and close the gate. And they whispered to me, man. They said, why don't you see if you can take your dad down, right? Take him down, right? A wrestling move, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, and then it's my first year in college, and I'm about 6'8". I weighed probably about 230. So and they challenged me, and I was like, well, I'll be darned. What do I do? So we got to the gate, and we walked through, and then Dad turned his back to me to close the gate.
Right.
And when he turned his back to close the gate, I just shot in behind him, man. I wrapped my arms around his waist, and I got to drop the leg behind both of his feet, and I drug him down and rolled over on top of him, man. And I'd done it, man. Wow. It was just bang, bang like that. He didn't expect it. And I took him down, man. But geez, it was then time to pay the price for it. I didn't consider what might happen afterwards. So he instantly, man, popped up on his hands and knees, man, and I was behind him, and he reached back there and he grabbed my inner thigh, man, and he spun himself out from underneath me and around on top of me. And instead of me being on top of him, he was on top of me. And then the next thing that happened is he took the back of my head. He reached and took the back of my head, and he shoved my face straight down in the dirt, right? And then he reached back and grabbed my right leg, and he jerked up my right leg so hard that both of my feet came up in the air, and then he ran my face like a plow through the dirt straight for about 10 feet.
Wow.
And then when he got me to where he wanted to, I guess he had done what he wanted to do. He didn't say a word. He just dropped me belly first, and he stood up and went right straight to the house as if nothing had happened. He left me laying there in the dirt.
Oh my God.
And my two buddies, they cracked up there laughing like crazy.
Yeah.
Until I got up. Right. It was their fault. I was like,
God.
Oh, my boys. This ain't good. So, I got one more, man. And this one's kind of a little short one, And so I was about, this one's kind of about Dad not having any fear, man, of man or beast. I never saw him show any kind of fear ever. When he was only about 18 years old and he was training to be a wrestler, to show he didn't have any fear of man or beast, he and his uncle, Lester, which was my grandfather's younger brother, he's about 20 years younger than my grandfather, him and Dad, Lester and Dad was about the same age. They were both learning to wrestle, and they trained a bear to wrestle, right? Mm-hmm. So they were basically tough enough that they couldn't wrestle men yet, but they were wrestling bears.
Right. Yeah.
That's a pretty good indication of being fairly tough. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll finish it like this, man. Dad had a thing about catching snakes. And not just any kind of snake. The only ones he wanted to catch was the poisonous ones. He didn't, catching a little garter snake or black snake. They didn't have it in. But if he ever saw a poisonous one, I got to catch that boy, right?
Right.
So, we lived in the South, and we had plenty of those around, plenty of snakes around, right? We had on our farms, we had water moccasins, we had copperheads, we had coral snakes, we had cottonmouths, and we had rattlesnakes. And the last one, the rattlesnake that I just mentioned, the only one we ever saw, he caught right in front of me and my brother. We saw him. Dad's driving a tractor, and the rattlesnake came out from underneath a thing that he ran over, mm-hmm. and he couldn't hardly stop the tractor before he jumped off to catch that rattlesnake. He was a rattlesnake, right? And so he caught the snake right in front of me and Rob, and then he caught it, and he said, you boys need to take this to my dad. Mm-hmm. to our grandfather, Roy, right? Yep. And I've told this part of this story before, but we did. We took the rattlesnake to Roy, and he sewed his mouth shut, and he used that rattlesnake to throw in the laps of his wrestling buddies, man, or riding in the car, or whenever he could. He used that rattlesnake, I guess, until the rattlesnake died because he couldn't eat. But he used him to scare everybody that he was around. So, and speaking of Roy, he might have been the only guy, Mr. Barnes, that was tougher than my father. So I hope I give you some idea, Mr. Barnes, of my dad's toughness. One of these studcasts later on, man, we've got to talking about Dad. Maybe we'll talk about, have an opportunity to talk about his tender heart. I mean, he not only was pretty tough, but he was just the opposite, too. He was really a soft-hearted guy.
And some of those stories about your grandfather on some of the early studcasts are just unbelievable. And he's riding down the road, and he's got folks in the backseat of the car, and the rattlesnake is under the seat. Just incredible stories. You never cease to it. You guys, if you haven't heard them, go back and check out some of those early studcasts at tnstud.com. They're all on there. And that is really the history of wrestling and riding down the road. I'm telling you that. You never cease to amaze me, Rod. You make these studcasts much more than a wrestling story, Stud, no doubt. Every one of them is absolutely a remarkable ride. Hey, folks, I tell you what, if you'd like to become friends with Ron or to participate in the dueling cards pick and TV pick as well, but are not already friends on Facebook, you can become friends by going to his Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud Facebook page. Like him, follow him there, and automatically become friends with a legend. Look for his Studcast number 276 post, and then make your choice. On Twitter, find him on Twitter at Ron Fuller Welch. If you have not already done so, follow him there too. That's another way to participate. Look for his Studcast number 276 post to make your choices on Twitter. The YouTube channel, Southeastern Rewind. It's filled with all kinds of information, videos, and Studcast. It is also a great place to find out more about what's happening, what's new on his tremendous streaming channel, ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com is where you find everything that is the Tennessee Stud. His classic old school TV shows are absolutely great. There are 88 Southeastern, 23 Continental, 12 Gulf Coast TV shows there now, all in the order in which they were recorded. Hundreds more are coming. 46 stud stories, 6 stars of the sport, 4 superstars of the past, 12 chapters of his audiobook Brutus, and hundreds of hours of fantastic old school wrestling already. All of this for only $4.99 per month or $39.99 per year, plus the free 1-week trial still available. It's the best deal in wrestling. The best deal in wrestling. You got to check it out. All right, so where are we riding next on the next Studcast, Ron?
Well, we're headed in one of the best weeks in wrestling, man, traditionally. And, it's the biggest holiday in America, and it's the same thing for wrestling and for wrestling fans. We're headed into Thanksgiving week. Next week, 1978, we'll be talking about. Both territories are going to have great cards, obviously. It's Thanksgiving. And also great TVs to promote those cards. Knoxville going to have a Russian torture match. They're going to have 2 championship matches, and they're going to have another elimination match and a bounty match, and more beyond that. Southeastern Gulf Coast card is just as loaded, man. It's got a $10,000 battle royal. It's got 2 championship matches. It's got a ladies match, and it's got 7 matches in all on that card. So it's plus the TV. Is going to have a battle royal. We already talked about that. So we didn't just discuss, and I'm sorry, I know that I mentioned earlier in the show today that we were going to talk about the big stars that were coming, the other wrestlers in the territory. They're going to be moved back and forth from one territory to the other, and why that made sense. We didn't get to that today, but next week, I'm pretty sure Dave will try our best to get that in there. We'll get to it next week, and hopefully we might even have another learning tree next week.
Yeah.
So want to thank everybody as always for listening today, and I hope if you enjoyed the ride, for those that this is your first time, and for those that have been with me for a long, long time, I hope you've enjoyed it today, and please come back again next week for another look back into wrestling history, and take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.